Vietnam is a vibrant, communist country in Southeast Asia whose economy has grown rapidly in recent years as it's pursued economic liberalization and reform. I'm Matt Gertkin, Asia-Pacific analyst, and I'll be heading up Agenda this week with Colin Chapman, your usual host, who's been traveling all across Vietnam. Vietnam is in the state of political transition after its party congress in January and its upcoming National Assembly elections in May that'll solidify a new leadership. What are people saying in Vietnam about this new leadership? Is it better prepared to cope with the country's economic and social problems?
The new General Secretary does seem quite well respected. The government has taken some tough decisions, it's tightened up credit, and this will slow growth this year. But it has a yawning trade deficit of $12 billion, and that's not so easily fixed. And remember, there's only $10 billion in national reserves. The government also seems unable to curb speculation, which is rife, particularly around Hanoi. On the main road from Hanoi to the Chinese border, you see row upon row of quarter-finished housing developments. Developers have been sold leases on the land by the government. They've started the building and hope to sell them to individuals. But the problem is few individuals can afford to complete them, so they just stand empty. And the government has not yet been able to tackle its severe infrastructure problems, most noticeably the need to improve roads and deal with acute power shortages, nor has it been able to make the state enterprises more efficient. It's also been trying to privatize the state-owned airline, Vietnam Airlines, but this has become bogged down. So far, the government has not been able to persuade big Vietnamese investors to invest at home rather than outside the country. But, it's not all bad. Agriculture, forestry, manufacturing and retail make up half of GDP. That's a good balance. And Vietnam is one of the few developing countries listed as poor in 2000 to have now achieved the UN's Millennium Goals. Poverty has been reduced from 50% to just over 10%.
Inflation is obviously one of the biggest economic and social concerns for the Vietnamese leadership. Inflation hit 14% in March, and it's created a difficulty for the government in attempting to shield people from rising commodity prices abroad. And at the same time, many Vietnamese have lost confidence in their currency, which has lost value. What did you witness, Colin? How is the average Vietnamese person coping with inflation?
Well, with difficulty, but it depends who you are. With inflation at 14% and rising, keeping money in the bank isn't a good option because you're actually losing money, of course. So what we're seeing are many of the ordinary folk keeping their cash in a safe in their homes, and those with more money buying gold, and if they can, doing that overseas. There's a lot of money flowing out, and one reason the customs now x-ray all suitcases before immigration and before security checks. In any form of trade, the Vietnamese prefer the dollar to the dong, and God knows the dollar's fallen in value enough as it is. I think we'll see another significant dong devaluation very soon, probably this summer. Less likely, but still possible, is that one or more of the 41 joint stock banks will run into trouble. They're small, many of them are undercapitalized and a worry for both the government and investors.
Throughout Vietnam's history, the ruling elite has stayed in power by keeping the rural masses under their heel. Farmers have been the backbone of the Vietnamese economy, and even today 72% of the population is engaged in agriculture. What was your read, Colin, on the situation of rural stability? How much is the rural sector facing economic problems, and how well are farmers and fishermen able to cope with those problems?
Well, they are hurt, of course, by the rising cost of things like oil and fertilizer and so on. But demand is strong, food prices have been rising, and these are tight-knit family businesses. They gave up collective farming as a dead loss years ago. I visited farming areas in the north, the highlands and the Mekong, and the street markets in towns and villages, and all seem to be flourishing. Up in the highlands, an area that suffered severe damage in the war from defoliants like Agent Orange, the agriculture seemed abundant. Then this is an area that has diversified a lot, particularly into coffee. I'd not realised that Vietnam has become the second largest coffee producer in the world after Brazil, and that's a big export earner. The Mekong Delta is also one of Asia's main rice bowls, with 3 harvests a year, and that's now threatened by hydroelectric dams planned for higher up the river in Laos and in China. And the Mekong farmers really fear for their livelihoods. It's also threatened by increased salinity attributed to climate change. Climate change is an issue which is much discussed in Vietnam, with economists suggesting that in 50 years' time, 20% of the entire land will be under the sea.